When the numbers come out, I suspect that Morning Joe over at MSDNC may have its highest ratings in the history of that program. Now, uh, that could be 27 people nationwide, but that's being driven because of all of the media hyperventilation yesterday over Donald Trump's tweet about the host of that program, co-host of that program, Mika Brzezinski. She's been sleeping with the co-host Joe Scarborough for quite some time, but broke up both of their marriages. So we know they're are people of high moral character and high standards, as most people in mainstream media are. We've got Mika, who is just on a tear because President Trump yesterday said that she had wanted to come down along with Joe to Mar-a-Lago over the New Year's holiday weekend, and she had just had a facelift, and he said she was bleeding from it, and it was awful. Uh, it appears that some people are questioning whether she actually had a facelift done or not, and how dare he insult a woman, and it just shows you he's a misogynist, and he's mean to the media, and he's trying to silence the media. All of the hyperventilating going on. There was some guy yesterday speaking in Aspen, Colorado, at some media conference, and this dingaling said Donald Trump is going to get one of us killed because of his rhetoric. Just a couple of weeks ago, you had a fellow traveler who opened fire at a Republican congressional baseball practice, and media immediately said, well, rhetoric has nothing to do with it. The fact that we were on TV here at MSDNC and he was watching us every night criticize the president and Republicans could not have had any impact on him going out there and shooting up these people. Well, now that the president is critical of media, all of a sudden, rhetoric, the words can be hurtful and they can inspire. We're back to that. As long as it's about them, then it's true. If it's about one of their fellow travelers, then it's not true. You understand how that works. 8 minutes after 8 o'clock, we're at 53. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're talking firearms in hour number 2 of the program today. If you'd like, stick around for that. Todd Eccles. And also we've got the folks from Washington Street Pawn coming in too as well. And we'll be talking about various firearms, and we'll be talking about firearm safety as we do Fridays, and we take your telephone calls. This all developed, this whole notion of having this gun segment, when I decided that I was going to pursue an enhanced carry permit. And what I decided to do was have the gun segment on every week, because after it's been a year now, it'll be a year and just tomorrow I think it's the first anniversary since we've had what they call constitutional carry in Idaho, which means you don't need a permit to carry concealed. On the other hand, if you'd like to go to Wyoming or Montana or Utah or Nevada, you might want to get the enhanced carry permit so you can carry across state lines. Otherwise, you could find yourself in some trouble. The gun show was an outgrowth of all of that, because after that law passed, I decided that I would go through that whole process and walk myself through it along with other people who listen to this program. And I got a call yesterday. My permit was approved. I've got to go to County West today, or as soon as I can, and get my photograph taken for the permit, the actual permit. So I've reached that point. But now, of course, when you get there, you realize there's still a lot more you need to know, which is why we're doing the program. But what we're trying to do is encourage people to do all of this, do it safely, so that we can avoid any criticism from the left, who are still venting about the passage of constitutional carry in Idaho. They were predicting that this was going to become the lawless Old West, that people would be out in the middle of the streets coming out of saloons and drawing on each other, and it hasn't happened. And maybe it hasn't happened because we've all kept level heads, but that's the whole goal of that gun show on Friday mornings. In the meantime, getting back to this story about President Trump and President Trump's tweet yesterday, you may wonder why he would do such a thing. Now, a lot of Republicans like Lindsey Graham are saying, oh, he's sullied the reputation of the Oval Office. Really? Remember the name Monica Lewinsky? How about Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton? And they're claiming somehow that Trump has sullied the reputation of the Oval Office. John Kennedy was having women come into that office when he was president. Lyndon Johnson was a man who we'll leave it to the critics of Johnson. I spent a college career focusing all of my efforts in speech criticism and rhetoric on Lyndon Johnson, so I have a well-versed in his history. 811, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Now, you had 8 years of mainstream media doing for Barack Obama figuratively what Monica Lewinsky did literally for President Clinton. You wonder why Donald Trump gets upset with mainstream media? This is a montage that was put together. It's about 2.5 minutes long, but I think it's worthwhile playing it. A montage from a website called Gravy and Media, and it's from the last several months of that Morning Joe program over at MSDNC. And see if you were the president, see if you would at some point react to this.
I keep hearing from people now, is he okay?
Yeah.
Is he okay? Like dead serious, they look at me and they say, is he okay? And I don't have a good answer.
I have the answer. He's not.
People on the inside say he keeps getting worse and mentally keeps getting worse. This is a man in decline.
This president cannot be stopped. He's not well. And by the way, this travel ban wouldn't have helped anything that happened. I mean, it's the lack of intellectual ability is stunning.
There's the unwritten rule in the psychiatric community that nobody diagnoses from afar. I just don't think he's a well guy, period.
The behavior pattern that he is demonstrating right now is not normal. And, you know, I kind of just want to dispense with political correctness for a bit and just say what everyone is thinking. This behavior is crazy. He needs to get a grip.
This is so unbalanced. He is not well. He's just not well.
He has literally devolved to the point where there is concern about his health or about his ability to take in information and use it correctly. It's like a child.
Are you concerned about the president's health?
I think his family should be concerned about his health.
And I don't know how we withstand an unhinged presidency. I'm seriously worried about a person who would do this. I'm worried about that person's on a number of levels.
Because he's not well and he's not attached to reality.
Just asking, swear to God, this guy's tweeting right now, our president, the leader of the free world. He's got his fingers on the button, and he's tweeting about Hillary. Oh, it's time for Article 25.
Amendment 20, the 25th Amendment.
25th Amendment, let's do it.
And the psychiatrist is stepping.
No, seriously, you have all this misinformation being churned out by the president himself sometimes. This looks like the steps leading up to a total meltdown. Because this is not funny. This is really bad. Just for the record, we're all really nervous. So if people out there feel nervous, we do too. And we don't think this is funny.
Somebody at the top of his campaign last summer said to me, we're all really worried about his emotional state.
Yeah. He's not well. He's not of sound mind. That's somebody that clinically you look at and say, there's something wrong with him. He's clearly not well. I'm not a
well, and the question is really,
he's mentally ill.
These liberal freaks would be doing this to anybody who had gotten elected president as a Republican. Let's make that clear. It's not just Donald Trump, albeit he is certainly unique in American politics. But during the course of last year's election campaign, Morning Joe promoted Trump's candidacy during the primary season. And if you go back and look at mainstream media over the last few decades, it's always a Republican they feel they can defeat in the general election that gets promoted as being the candidate. John McCain in 2008 was a prime example. All of the media said, oh, wonderful, wonderful. Oh, he certainly shows that all Republicans are not troglodytes. And John McCain is certainly a wonderful human being. Primaries ended, McCain got the nomination, and it's like, well, you know, that John McCain, I mean, what a fruitcake. He's got to be losing his mind. He's clearly too old for the job. He's had cancer. He's not very healthy. You've got to vote for our friend Barack Obama. Morning Joe promoted Donald Trump through the primary season, but they never expected that he would be the guy who could defeat Hillary Clinton. Their thinking was, if we promote him and we help him get the nomination, then we know he'll be the candidate Hillary Clinton could most easily defeat. It didn't work out that way. Now they're paying the price for that, and now they're whining because he's swinging back at them. I am not going to be among those Republicans along the cowardly lines of Lindsey Graham and people along the lines of the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Paul Ryan, who sit there and say, oh, I think this tweet was wholly inappropriate. Not after what Bill Clinton did in that White House, folks. Not at all. Speaking of which, even during the Obama years, they talk about how wonderful he was. Stimulus package, failure. Obamacare, failure. Syria policy, failure. ISIS policy, failure. You get the idea, but they wouldn't criticize anything that man did. They threw him softball questions one after another. for nearly a decade, and they're still talking about how wonderful he was, and if only he could have been president for life. They say Trump is an authoritarian who'd like to be a dictator, yet that's exactly what they wanted out of Barack Obama. Telephone number for reaching our program this morning, 736-0300, 736-0300. We're at 52 on our way today, probably high 70s, but then we're going to get into some very hot weather, warming up through the weekend and then into the high 90s by the middle of the week. We could have 100 on Independence Day and pretty darn close to 100 over the course of the next week through next weekend. Weather service of Mountain Home Auto Ranch in Mountain Home. Here's the thing that I've really been concentrating on with this. When I go out and sit in a local diner and I listen to some of the chatter going on from people, I don't find anybody out there who is sympathetic to the establishment, whether it be political establishment, deep state establishment, or media establishment. On the other hand, they're happy that someone is finally swinging back and swinging for the fences. We have a caller with us. It's 817. Caller, you're on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. You know, it appears that there's a competition going on among these liberals now to see who can be the most offended over a trivial matter. They just, try to articulate the greatest offense that could possibly ever be expressed over whatever small matter is being presented.
Well, think about the guy in Boise who owned the pizza shop, and he put up a picture of himself in a shark costume, but in order for the contrast, he painted his face black because it was the inside of the shark's mouth. Now they're saying, oh, he's prejudiced because he's wearing blackface, and we all know he must not like black people. Give me a break. And to the offense about that, if I lived close enough, I'd be there for lunch every day to support that guy. But it shows you the mindset of these people. They'll destroy somebody else's life because they need to manufacture some offense to keep their position.
Exactly. In fact, I'm the one that called in yesterday about the comment about the taking offense when the offense is not intended, etc. Well, they're just seeing if they can outdo each other on this path to calling impeachment and all this kind of stuff. And it just shows what fools they are. They're just as foolish as they can be anyway. Thanks for the moment on the phone.
Hey, and thank you for the call. Well said, too. I got to take a short break, but more of your telephone calls coming up in just a moment. I sent out a tweet last night of my own, and I said that if Mika can't stand the heat, she ought to get back in the kitchen. Now, if you know anything about history, a president by the name of Harry Truman said something along the lines of, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. So it was a play on words. Oh, my goodness. The liberals just went berserk about that. The whole crew from Socialist Television in Boise, the public television crowd, screaming and yelling, and one of them said, hey, this Southern Idaho talk show host is just looking for attention. Well, thank you for giving it to me. You people, by the way, are working on my tax dollars, and good golly, your state capital show is one of the worst produced television programs in the history of the planet, and none of you got any broadcast talent. Let's make that clear. 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. We've got more on this subject on the way. Thanks for listening this morning, but if you're struggling with hearing the program, it may well be you need to see Dr. Christine Pickup, a doctor of audiology at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. Why would you choose Mount Harrison Audiology? You're thinking probably there are a lot of choices around. Well, number one, let me just say the service is wonderful. Did you know that Dr. Pickup offers communication skills classes and oral rehabilitation therapy that you could also use at home? At Mount Harrison Audiology, she knows that hearing aids are only part of the equation. And true hearing health care should include tools and techniques that enhance communication for you and your loved ones. Trust your hearing to Dr. Pickup at Mount Harrison Audiology. The number 208-312-0957. That's 208-312-0957. It's 8:23. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. What we're dealing with here is an effort by mainstream media to assist with the silent coup, along with their friends in the deep state, to remove Donald Trump. And when he fights back, then they turn around and say, aha, we told you. Why is it that people in media think that they are so gold dang special? I've been in media most of my life, one form or another. I've done some print work. I've done some radio work, some television work, and now I'm doing online as well. But I never thought any day on the job that what I was doing was in any way equal to the guy who's trying to cure cancer or the guy who's sending rocket ships into space. That is difficult. Just because I occasionally interview a cancer doctor or a rocket scientist does not make me one by osmosis. The fact of the matter is they long ago gave up any what you'd call semblance of objectivity, especially when it came to Republicans, especially now when it comes to Donald Trump. And I say especially with the Republicans as a precursor to that. Look how they cover the healthcare debate. Oh, Joey Johnson may lose his health insurance. Here in South Carolina, Joey's very popular in the community, but if he loses his health insurance, he's going to die. The evil Republicans are insensitive. They're doing the job of the mainstream media for the mainstream media. Or rather, the media is doing it for their fellow travelers in government, the Democrats. And many of the other establishment types in the Republican Party, who we discussed yesterday, really don't mean what they say. They just go along with big government, too. You're up next. You're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Hey, yesterday when I got home from work, I sat down and went through my Facebook page and had Fox News on at the same time. There wasn't anything on Facebook about President Trump's tweet. But Fox News was all over it with everybody that was on there, and you just played that montage of the others. It's crazy. I just don't think that the people that voted for him or anybody else really cares. That's all I got.
Hey, thank you much. Again, I've seen that. I wrote a newspaper column about this a few weeks ago. When I'm out at Farmer's restaurant having breakfast, or I'm over at T&T, or I'm down in Snowville, Utah at Molly's, and I just try to pick these diners, and I go to these diners, various places, and I sit down, get something to eat, and then I just listen to the chatter in the background, and it's about tractors, it's about the cost of pickup trucks, it's about the need for a new job. Nobody gives a red rat's patootie about the feelings of Mika Brzezinski, if they even know who she is. Frankly, the folks over at MSDNC's Morning Joe, as well as the folks who work on that legislative program at Boise Public TV, they could just as well go in the witness protection program because nobody knows who they are. There's zeros. Really, when it comes to media, there's zeros. 826. They don't realize it because in their small circle, everyone pats them on the back and says, "Oh, aren't you wonderful? Yes, and you're wonderful too. Mm-hmm. Well, Donald Trump is evil, but you know what? Killing babies in the womb is wonderful. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Now let's go use the opposite sex bathroom." 827. Speaking of people in media, James O'Keefe says he's got another video coming out today of CNN. He's just been dropping these things one after another this week to embarrass the Clinton News Network. Yesterday, he tried to actually stop. The fellow who runs that network as the guy came out of his apartment, and the guy delayed coming out for an hour, and then he came rushing out and raced away as quickly as he could to avoid questions. O'Keefe ended up appearing on a program yesterday, a radio show called Freedom Maine, and he's responding to the Washington Post, which is criticizing him as a propagandist.
Read from the Washington Post, which we'll get to later here. O'Keefe, who appears on the video as a kind of master of ceremonies, further this impression by saying the footage describes the real motivation. So in other words, the Washington Post is writing that instead of like being an anchor or I'm just hosting the series, I'm a, quote, master of ceremonies. It's this language, it's this characterization. We are doing precisely what they've been doing for 50 years. I mean, I'm not reading off a teleprompter, by the way, but I'm presenting the material as they always do. If you watch the series, it's professionally produced. In fact, I had producers direct message me from mainstream media outlets, because not all of them hate me, saying, "James, that was very well done. That was a very well put together piece of journalism." And the Washington Post is writing, "I'm a master of ceremony, like I'm a clown." Another characterization, this is the Rolling Stone, quote, "Even worse, the villainous Project Veritas, the beta noir of right-wing gotcha journalism, whose James O'Keefe makes the late Andrew Breitbart seem like Edward R. Murrow, succeeded all of this with a CNN-targeted prank. And in the next sentence of the Rolling Stone article, Rolling Stone says that CNN confirmed the legitimacy of the recording.
In other words, they claim he's not really a journalist. He's a propagandist. He's a joke. And then they say, oh, but what he got was right. Yeah. But pay no attention to that. As I say, he's got another big surprise coming out today that will be another major embarrassment for the Clinton News Network. Maybe next week he can turn his sights on MSDNC and start bringing them down as well. Got a short break coming up. First half hour has just clipped by today in record time. At least feels like record time. We're at 55. Bill Cowley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. More on this subject and a lot of stories that didn't get reported yesterday, including last night when about 7 p.m. Eastern Time, would have been 5 p.m. our time, when it started. The clock started running now on the travel pause from 7 potentially terrorist countries. We've got that coming up as well. Quick note, next Wednesday on the program, I will be away, but Steve Millington will be filling in, and he'll also be talking with the good folks from Tripp Family Medicine here in Twin Falls. Tripp Family Medicine on Fillmore Street, directly across from the main post office. Dr. Tripp and his staff are still looking for new patients. Often, the doctor and his staff, they can see you on the very same day if you're a patient and you call in the morning with a medical issue. I'd like to remind you, though, the operative word there is often. Not always, but often. And we should note, life's too short not to feel good. More on the way in just a couple of minutes. We're at 53 at 8:30. Well, young people wouldn't know this, but when I was young, I went to see a movie called Caddyshack. And in the movie, Ted Knight plays a fellow who's this pompous, overstuffed fellow who's very important at his local country club. And there's a younger fellow who plays golf there, played by Chevy Chase. And apparently the Ted Knight character had been Chevy Chase's character's dad's best friend. And then at some point in the movie, Chevy Chase says to Ted Knight, he says, I got to tell you, Dad never liked you. And I'm thinking that mainstream media, that they need that moment, that someone needs to tell them, folks, nobody can stand you. 8:34, Bill Cowley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's because you're so incredibly pompous. 54 right now. Let's see if we've got a caller with us. Caller, you're on the air. Go ahead. You're on KLIX.
Yeah, on that deal with Trump's last tweet that everybody's screaming about, they're accusing him of calling her bad names or something.
Yeah, I said that she was.
Anything.
Yeah.
He never said she was ugly, pretty, beautiful, whatever. He just said she had surgery and was bleeding.
Right.
Maybe he thought maybe she should go back to the doctors and get the bloody bandages changed or something. But he never said nothing bad about her.
And I don't care if he had, and I thank you for the call. I don't care if he had said anything bad about her. I think it's irrelevant to the daily grind of government and what goes on in Washington. But I'll just add to that. Media wants you to get the impression that he called her a streetwalker or something. Nothing like that happened. 8:35. You're up next. You're on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com.
Morning, Bill. Well, the book written in 1969 was published called All the News That Fits, and it was a New York Times war correspondent, and he was reporting that we were winning in the war, but the New York Times, of course, was leading the attack against our soldiers, that we were, killing innocent women and children and so forth. The New York Times, this has been going on for decades, but it's intensified because Trump was just taking a bulldozer to the New World Order, climate change, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, trying to create this world government. So, they really have an agenda, and it's to destroy Trump at any cost. And here's Trump fighting back, pointing out the obvious. And I'll tell you, a lot of us are out there cheering and saying, keep it up, because everybody else has just been a wimp and hasn't had any gumption or to do anything other than just, I guess that's the way it is. And we certainly need Congress to get some backbone. They're just a bunch of jellyfish back there. It's just terrible that they will not stand up and uphold their oath of office to do what they're supposed to be doing.
I was thinking of that comment that Phil Donahue made where he pointed out when Trump goes and speaks in an arena, 20,000 people come out to hear him. Obama never could do that. He could bring out maybe 3,000. He could, he went back to Pittsburgh after being elected, and he brought out like 80 people to a Union Hall where there'd been a few hundred a year before. Hillary Clinton would go and speak to empty seats mainly. The fact of the matter is that these 20,000 people in Columbus or Sheboygan or Boise or wherever Trump goes and speaks, and people show up in such large numbers, and bikers for Trump and all, I think that the establishment is playing a very dangerous game because these 20,000 people in each one of these spots, this is no longer the silent majority. This is ripe for an uprising if they try to take him out.
Oh, absolutely. And it is, he's definitely been a leader in leading America back to the greatness. We need to just support him. We need to be praying for him morning and night all day long because they're going to try to take him out one way or another. And if they can't take him out with all the fake news and all the other stories, they'll try to take him out like they did George Wallace and Reagan and so forth. So we need to be supporting him instead of trying to find all his faults. He's not a perfect man. We didn't elect a preacher. We elected somebody who would take our fight and drain the swamp.
Well said, and I thank you for the call. We've got about a minute before the break. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Bill, what's not reported is, while President Obama did a photo op saying his number one priority was to make people safe, during his presidency, children were shot walking distance from his home in Chicago. Thousands of people were shot, stabbed, and murdered to death, some by vehicles. Hundreds of girls and women were raped. Chicago and Illinois are in a horrible economic crisis. So much for his number one priority.
Yeah, well said. As I was pointing out earlier, he failed on the stimulus package. He failed on health care. He failed on Syria. He failed on Russia. What else there's a whole laundry list of things here, and media still wants to tell you how wonderful he was. He was an abject failure. Lots of rhetoric, pretty words the media liked. Oh, he's a person of color. Yeah. Oh, transformational change. Yeah. And the country just continued to circle the drain for 8 years. 20 minutes from 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. We're up to 58. I wanted to mention we'll talk firearms after 9 o'clock news this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. I mentioned earlier, weather is going to take a dramatic turn, really starting Independence Day and then through the rest of next week. It's going to be nice over the course of the weekend, but we're going to get into Ramsey Heating and Electric weather next week. That is, temperatures flirting with triple digits for many days. It'll be very, very sticky out there. Not a lot of rain. It's that period of summer where we'll be very dry. Weather at Service of Mountain Home Auto Ranch in Mountain Home. Speaking of Ramsey Heating and Electric, if you're having trouble, and yes, you are going to be taxing that AC unit next week like never before in many cases, you need to give a call to the pros. And if you've got a problem, they'll come out and they'll get the job done right. And Ramsey Heating and Electric will make sure the job gets done right the first time. Problem-free, cozy summers are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. Telephone number is 678-0459. That's 678-0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. Donald Trump's tweet pretty much allowed the media off the hook covering stories. The media didn't want to cover this story about the travel pause from the 7 terrorist countries. Well, they're still unhappy that the Supreme Court actually sided with the law instead of, oh, it hurts my feelings, so the court should rule on my feelings, and therefore, but the court ruled, and with the court's ruling on this, it all came into effect again last night. Do you realize that there weren't any, the usual suspects who show up, the rent-a-mob that always shows up for these things, apparently because the Supreme Court has said this is it, it's definitive. There were no rent-a-mobs at the airport last night putting on the dog and pony show. What happens normally in these situations, you get all these people to go out there, the same Pete Seeger impersonators who show up at all of these things, and hey, ho, Donald Trump has got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho, travel ban has got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho, I don't like hostess, ho, ho. But none of them were available apparently last night in this particular situation. Why is that? Somebody must have forgotten their phone number. 844. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air.
Good morning, Bill. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
Hope everybody has a safe weekend this weekend. You know, while you talk, I'm waiting for the subject to come up. I love this when it comes to a liberal, the little parasites that they are. You know, the Supreme Court is wrong on the travel ban. The Supreme Court is wrong. They made a mistake. But yet, the time I bring up to them, let's just say when the Supreme Court said Roe v. Wade was okay to do. Well, no, the Supreme Court's right. Because they're right. This is my gear. That makes me happy.
I think the problem they've got this time around, though, too, is that this was a unanimous decision from the court. The fact that their girls, Sotomayor and Kagan, didn't actually went along with it, they don't know how to address it.
Well, you're right, because it says right in the Constitution the president has the right to stop people from coming to this country. It's pretty plain and simple. See, it's the same with the Second Amendment. Whatever these people want, what they think is right for them, for the whole world, just because they like it, is what they're spoiled brats. Tell a little kid you can't have that candy bar, and when they start kicking pretty quick, you give them the candy bar, not because it's good for them, because you want to shut them up. And that's what these liberals want. They think everybody should just go along with them and do the dancing in the streets like you were just saying that hey, hey, ho crap. That's the way they think. Well, see, they got to remember we're a country of laws. The Supreme Court is the supreme lawmaker, not lawmakers, but the supreme, the Supreme Court. What else can you say about them? But yet they want everybody and everything to go with them. Try to go into the Supreme Court and change Roe v. Wade and see what happens. They're going to fight. They're going to do anything they can to stop it. But if you went in to try to change this law, the travel ban, that's all right.
Well,
that's okay.
Thanks for the call. When that happens, when somebody does challenge Roe and it comes up from one of the state courts or the district courts, you'll see all of the women in comfortable shoes. They'll be sitting around outside saying, "I can't kill my baby because of the mean Christians and conservatives. I want to kill. Well, I don't actually have a baby, and no man will breed with me. But if I was going to have a baby," let's go back to the telephones. You're next. You're on the air on Top Story. Go ahead.
Hey, Bill, excellent show as always. Just to a little point that caller before me made is the problem with liberals is that since their youth, since their infancy, the parents have never told them no. They're always told them they're the best. They can do anything they want. And they grow up and they run into society and that, you know what, it doesn't work that way. You don't always get what you want. You got to go by what the law says. If they don't like it, hell, they can move over to Russia or Cuba or Venezuela, wherever the hell they want to go. It's ridiculous. Have a great day.
Thank you. I went to an RTNDA, that's Radio Television News Directors Association conference. Gosh, it was back about not quite 20 years ago. While I was working as a TV news director at the time. And there was a seminar going on that was being put on. All of these college kids would come hang out and troll for jobs. The wealthy ones who had the money to do it. The folks who had a blue-collar background couldn't travel to all of these conventions. But these kids would show up, and there was a guy running a seminar one year, and it was said you could go to it. And you ever remember the Monty Python sketch about the abuse clinic? The guy comes in, and he walks in, and the guy starts screaming. Well, there's an argument clinic, but he ends up in the abuse office by mistake at first, and the guy's screaming at him, "You stupid git, you're ugly." These kids would go into this seminar, and there would be a guy there who was playing a news director in a TV newsroom, and he would scream at them, and he would swear, and he'd go ballistic and throw his arms around. These kids would come out shell-shocked. They had no idea that that's what the working world could be like, and they were just appalled. And yet, because Mommy and Daddy said that I'm the smartest person around, and that when I get there, that I'm going to be the company president on the first day, and nobody's going to question anything that I do, and then I'm going to be able to take off any day I want and sleep in. You're next. You're on the air on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Go ahead.
Well, this is not on the subject, but I'll make it quick. You know this voice you do? I keep thinking, who is that? Who is that? I know that voice. I know that voice. And I realized who it was.
Who's that?
It's remember the psychologist on The Natural with Robert Redford, The Natural?
Yes.
And he was trying to get the team to think positive and win. That's the voice. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you much for the telephone call. Coming up on 10 minutes away from 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 57. Tucker Carlson. Oh, my gosh. Tucker Carlson is my absolute favorite television host. Maybe now of all time when it comes to these programs that we see on cable television. He had a guest on last night, Omar Nureldin. He is the Muslim Public Affairs Council's director. And he said Muslims need to come here because, well, if we don't allow them here, it would be mean-spirited. Listen to the little jousting he does, verbal jousting with Tucker Carlson.
The fact is that people from these countries are not coming here because they want to die, and that the president is saying that we need to ban people from these countries to come here. They're coming here because they want opportunities.
Okay, maybe they are, maybe they're not. I mean, I don't even think that you know their. Well, slow down. I don't think you know their names, so it's sort of hard to generalize about what they want. I don't know their names either. But really quickly, why does the United States benefit from having tons of people from, say, Somalia, a failed state with lots of terror, come here? How do we benefit from that? Why is that a good thing for us?
Tucker, immigrants are an integral part of our economy.
From Somalia?
Refugees. America has moral standing in the world because of its compassion for
So we don't have moral standing unless we let in lots of Somalis?
No, it's not that we don't have, unless we do that. This is part of our compassion, right, as Americans, to bringing the most vulnerable from around the world, as other countries do as well. And by saying that we're going to ban people from these countries, we're losing our moral standing. And at the end of the day, it's not
I'm
good
not losing my
national security
moral
policy.
standing, Omar. If I can just, I'll speak for myself. I don't think my moral standing takes a hit because I'm worried about Somali immigrants. That's just me. Call me shallow.
It's that line you get from these people. We aren't that kind of people. No, don't say we. You're not talking about me. And by the way, I don't feel that I'm out of the ordinary. And I was talking earlier about how a lot of these young people today who go out and look for work, we don't know what their parents are telling them, but somehow they're being sold a bill of goods either by their parents or in their schools. When I was a kid growing up, my old man was about 6.5 feet tall. He was just a granite block. You know, my dad, before he went in the Army, my dad had been a pro wrestler, briefly in Cleveland, Ohio. In fact, I was at one of these RTNDA conferences in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I was talking with, of all people, the then governor of that state, Jesse Ventura. And I was telling him that story about my dad started out as a pro wrestler and that the Army came along and ruined my dad's wrestling career. And, of course, Ventura, who'd been in the Navy, he was a Navy SEAL, Ventura says, yeah, the Army will do that to you. It's one of my better memories of one of those conferences that I happened to be attending. But my dad then, when he was a young man, he'd also been working on the railroad for a time. And because he was a behemoth in that era, he actually, at one point, he got offered, he was like swinging a hammer along the railroad in Ohio when a car pulled up. And who steps up but Paul Brown? And he says to my dad, you ever play football? And my dad said, in high school. Paul says, I'd like to give you a tryout. Well, my dad didn't do it. He said that it wasn't anything that interested him at the time. Who knows? He could have ended up playing on some championship Browns teams and done quite well post-career, as most of those guys did. But he was not. He had a very hard-scrabble upbringing. And he used to tell me all the time that he was still angry because my grandmother had given 10% of their income away when he was a kid growing up, because he said we didn't have 10% to begin with. So he had grown up in a very impoverished region of northwestern Pennsylvania, in the mountains of northwestern Pennsylvania, in the Alleghenies. And you know, they walked around in rags most of their lives. And he did not have a lot of, let me put it this way, at least he didn't show a lot of compassion. And when he was angry with you, oh my gosh, you just didn't want to be anywhere near the sound of his voice, which meant he could pretty much carry all across town when he would yell. It was a very, very, he was angry with me one night and he was coming at me and I was standing on the porch and I reached in and I grabbed the door and I closed it. It was the only way I figured I could stop him. Now, I should point out, he never hit me the whole time I can recall when I was a kid growing up, but I didn't want him to because of his size. My mother, on the other hand, she took care of the family discipline, and she grew up a farm girl. And again, they had basically nothing. She was born on a farm, and they had an outbuilding, and they grew up in this hardscrabble environment. They never told me to expect anything from anybody. That whole free lunch idea was a foreign concept, because they didn't even know what it was. My mother spent over 40 years of her life working on an assembly line in a factory. And I'll never forget, a family friend said, your mother's pretty rugged, and that comes down to the women that she works alongside with, and the fact that there's no fun in that environment. I look back on that, and you realize throughout human history, we live in pretty easy times. Even those people who might be working in factories now, what few may be left in America, but we live in pretty easy times compared to what most people went through. You think about the people who came west and settled this region. We talked about that before on the air, what they had to do just to make crops grow here. They had no time for even thinking about a free lunch because it was just beyond the realm of their own experience. 8:55, Bill Cowley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. So I want to be compassionate, but on the other hand, I also understand we can't be compassionate to 7 billion people on the planet by bringing them all here. And then you'll hear the liberals say, well, you got to remember that poem, bring me you're tired and you're poor. And no, that's a poem. That's not policy. That's a poem affixed on a statue. It's called Statue of Liberty. But poetry is not government policy. It's not law. You got that? And they can't seem to get it through their thick skulls. You're up next. You're on the air at 8:55. Go ahead.
Yeah, Bill, I hope this goes along with what you're saying. I have two employer friends here in town. One pays $25 an hour. That's start out. That's great. He gets them to show up for work one day, and then they're gone.
Yeah.
Then they come back for a check. So I just want to let you know that.
I'm not at all surprised. I was talking to a friend of mine a few years ago. He was an elected politician. He was serving in government, but he also had a farm where he raised watermelons. And he would tell me these guys would come and they would work for 2 or 3 days during the watermelon harvest and cut the watermelons, and then they would just disappear because once they got a little bit of money in their pocket, they'd go down either to the corner bar or they'd go buy some methamphetamine. And so you'd lose them. And he said you knew you were going to get 3 days out of them. He eventually found a crew of guys who had been doing this for years, and it was just by chance he came across this group of men, and they literally built a team. The younger guys would actually cut the vine, and then they would pass these things along and they chopped off the top of an old school bus, and what they would do is the last guy at the end of the line would throw these up, and then the older guys, because they could no longer do as much bending down, the older guys would stand in the topped off school bus, catch the watermelons, and stack them up. And he said these guys traveled the country doing it, and somebody had recommended them, because he was telling someone he was in a pinch, and that's how it got solved. But yeah, that's true. He just found so many people out there who were incredibly unreliable. And again, I don't know how we've bred them, but again, I think it's because we've become so soft, really, since the end of World War II. Some people out there, and I'll get the emails. Well, you're talking about the baby boom generation, and I'm a baby boomer, and I know you meant me specifically, and you're wrong. Give me a break. Firearms, next hour on this program. We're going to be talking guns, and we want you to stick around for that, obviously. 9 o'clock news, though, first, from Fox on News Radio 1310, KLIX, NewsRadio1310.com. It's 57 right now. On our way, I think, into the high 70s, maybe 80 today. And as I said, then the warmer weather starts. It's going to start creeping up through the weekend, and by Independence Day, nearly 100, maybe 100 in a lot of places, and it's going to stay that way for the foreseeable future. Weather, a service of Mountain Home Auto Ranch in Mountain Home.